1.4 billion people, tons of gold, oil, and fertile land. But did you know that only 1% of Africans have ever held a passport for their own continent? Even more shocking, today, the currency used to buy things in African capitals is printed in Paris. This secret has been hidden for too long. African borders were not drawn by Africans, but imposed by colonialists. And those lines are robbing billions of dollars in trade every year. But now, there is a movement to break those invisible chains. With one passport, one currency, one economy. The question is, who dares to lead? Yes, it is as you think. Ibrahim Traoré, he was the one who dared to stand up and lead everyone to rewrite everything. In 2016, the African Union officially launched the concept of an African passport at its summit in Kigali, Rwanda. The promise was clear: to allow Africans to travel freely within their own continent, just as Europeans do within the EU. But nearly a decade later, the project remains largely symbolic, limited to diplomats and senior officials. Ordinary Africans still face long queues, visa restrictions, and borders that were never theirs to begin with. The same holds true for trade. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNICA, intra-African trade accounted for only 15% of the continent's total trade volume in 2023. By comparison, Europe trades 70% within itself, Asia more than 50%. For Africa, this means billions lost to customs fees, currency exchanges, and policies designed in foreign capitals. But those statistics are only the surface. Beneath them lies a deeper story of leaders willing to risk everything to rewrite the map of power. The chamber of the African Union was thick with silence. Delegates shuffled papers, ministers leaned back in their chairs, and whispers filled the marble hall. Then came the voice that cut through the air, firm, deliberate, unyielding. It was Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, standing not with pomp, but with conviction. He spoke of chains forged in Berlin, of borders that sliced through families and tribes, of currencies that drained Africa's wealth while pretending to protect it. Every time a farmer pays customs at an artificial border, he declared, Africa grows weaker. Every time a trader loses profit through foreign exchange, Africa bows its head. And every time we accept the CFA franc, we accept that Paris, not Ouagadougou, decides our destiny. The words rippled across the chamber. Some nodded with hidden pride. Others shifted uneasily, glancing toward the doors, as if the walls themselves were listening. Traoré was not just proposing a policy. He was daring to break the silent pact that had kept Africa divided for over a century. He raised his hand, holding no paper, no notes, only truth. One Africa, one passport, one currency, one economy, not a slogan, not a dream, but a shield. Afro money, backed by our gold, our oil, our fertile soil, a tool not for elites, but for farmers, traders, students, for the millions who deserve to live free from foreign chains. The hall erupted. Applause from some, murmurs of dissent from others. A few stood in support, but several pushed back in alarm. One veteran leader leaned forward, voice trembling, "This is reckless. We fought for independence, not for a new master." Traoré did not flinch. His gaze swept the room like a searchlight. If unity is slavery, then chains must be freedom. Is that what you believe? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Delegates avoided each other's eyes. The weight of history pressed down on the room. Outside, no one yet knew what had been said. But inside, the air had shifted. Africa was no longer debating reforms. It was debating its soul. Outside the AU chamber, journalists were restless. Cameras flashed at closed doors, eager to capture the faces of leaders who carried the weight of the continent's future. Yet inside, the storm had just begun. A minister from the south rose sharply, his voice heavy with caution. "Our inflation already suffocates our people. And now you speak of one currency? Without unified fiscal policy, this will not unite us, it will destroy us." His words struck chords of fear. The older statesman nodded gravely, unwilling to gamble on dreams. But Ibrahim Traoré stood firm. "It is not a gamble," he countered. "It is arithmetic. A continent of 4 billion, with cobalt, manganese, oil, and gold in abundance. Yet we trade among ourselves less than anyone on earth. Who profits? Not our farmers, not our workers, only outsiders who feed on our disunity." The truth lingered, undeniable. In Burkina Faso, traders had seen their livestock lose value at every border. In Mali, cotton growers were forced to price their goods in CFA francs, while French treasuries held the reserves. In Ghana, students watched as visas barred them from opportunities within their own continent. And yet, fear gripped the chamber. Leaders whispered of sanctions from Europe, retaliation from Washington, and the collapse of fragile banks. For every nod of agreement, there was a scowl of defiance. Then Traoré leaned forward, his words slow, deliberate. "You call me reckless? Number? Reckless is watching generation after generation leave our villages to die in the desert of Libya or the waters of the Mediterranean, chasing futures we should have built here. Reckless is allowing Berlin's borders to dictate our tomorrow." The chamber fell silent once again. His words were more than rhetoric. They were indictment, confession, prophecy. And for the first time, even his critics could not deny the raw force of the argument. From the back row, a delegate whispered to another, "This is no longer about currency, it is about survival." At that moment, Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just the president of Burkina Faso. He was the echo of every African who had ever asked why freedom had not yet meant dignity. The night air over Addis Ababa was restless. After hours of debate, the African Union summit had adjourned, but no one was sleeping. In hotel lobbies, diplomats whispered. In cafes, journalists scribbled hurried notes. And in the dim light of his suite, Ibrahim Traoré sat by the window, staring out at the city. He had faced many battles, terror cells in the Sahel, economic sabotage, political assassinations, but this fight was different. It was invisible yet colossal. The war for imagination, for unity, for a new economic order. On the small desk beside him lay a dossier. Within it were charts, figures, and testimonies. The evidence was clear. With one currency, Africa could save nearly $50 billion annually in transaction costs. With one passport, trade and tourism could multiply, breaking the colonial walls that still divided the continent. And with one economy, Africa's GDP could rival that of Europe within a generation. But evidence alone was not enough. He knew that fear was stronger than numbers. Fear of sanctions, fear of coups, fear of being isolated. He thought of leaders before him, Nkrumah, Sankara, Gaddafi, men who had dared to speak of continental unity, men who had been silenced. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His aide entered quietly, carrying a secure phone. "Mr. President, a call from Bamako." It was Assimi Goïta, Mali's transitional leader. His voice was calm, but urgent. "Brother, the French are already moving. They have summoned our envoys in Paris, warning us of consequences if we continue down this path. They fear this union more than any weapon we could hold." Traoré smiled faintly. "Then they confirm our path is right." Silence hung between them, not of doubt, but of solidarity. Two young leaders, bound not by age or convenience, but by a vision that stretched beyond their lifetimes. "We may not see the harvest," Goïta said softly, "but we must plant the seed." Traoré's hand tightened around the receiver. Outside his window, the lights of Addis glimmered like stars, fragile yet unyielding. "Then let us plant it together," he replied. And with that, a pact was made, not written on paper, not ratified by diplomats, but etched in conviction. The next morning, the summit resumed. Cameras flashed, translators adjusted their headsets, and the chamber of the African Union pulsed with anticipation. Delegates knew that what was about to be discussed was no longer symbolic, it was revolutionary. A tall delegate from Nigeria rose first. His words were cautious, but weighted. Colleagues, the idea of one passport, one currency, one economy, yes, it is powerful. But we must also ask, at what cost? The West controls our reserves. The CFA franc is chained to Paris. Our economies are still reliant on loans from the IMF and World Bank. If we defy them, will we survive the retaliation? Murmurs rippled across the room. The fears were real. Everyone remembered Libya, where Gaddafi had been building a gold-backed dinar to unite Africa, and how quickly NATO jets had rained fire upon Tripoli. From the back of the chamber, a Senegalese minister spoke with trembling conviction. Our people dream of unity, but dreams alone will not shield us when the banks freeze our accounts, when their media brands us dictators, when their corporations abandon our markets. Traoré leaned forward. He had been silent long enough. The room hushed as his voice cut through the air. Brothers, sisters, for too long, we have asked, what will Europe say? What will America allow? But when did we last ask, what will Africa become if we do nothing? He rose to his feet, his uniform crisp, his posture unyielding. They will threaten us with sanctions? We already live under sanctions. They will freeze our reserves, our resources, our gold, our uranium, our oil, are the reserves. They will brand us dictators. They branded Lumumba, Sankara, Nkrumah the same. Yet history remembers them not as tyrants, but as martyrs of liberation. The chamber erupted in applause, some hesitant, some thunderous. Even those who doubted felt the pull of his words. But not all were convinced. A seasoned diplomat from Egypt leaned into his microphone. And if they come with coups, with assassinations, with drones, do we sacrifice our nations for an idea too dangerous to hold? The applause died down. The question hung like smoke. Traoré did not answer immediately. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning faces, old and young, fearful and hopeful. He knew this was not just politics. This was a wager with destiny. The silence in the hall stretched long, heavy with unease. Then, from the far end of the chamber, a delegate from Ghana stood. His suit was sharp, his tone polished, but his words cut with an edge that was not entirely his own. "My esteemed colleagues," he began, "unity is a noble dream, but we must face facts. Without the stabilizing partnership of France, of the European Union, of the United States, Africa cannot stand. The CFA franc protects us from inflation. Their investment secures our industries. Their militaries protect us from terrorism. To reject them is to invite chaos." Some heads nodded cautiously, others frowned, sensing the undertone. Traoré's jaw tightened. He recognized the language not of an African statesman, but of a Western press release. The Ghanaian delegate pressed on, his voice rising. "And let us not deceive ourselves. Talk of one passport, one currency, it is dangerous. It will provoke the very powers we depend on. Do we want to see Africa turned into another Libya, another Iraq, another Syria?" The room shifted uneasily. His words struck fear, but they also exposed something deeper, the fracture lines of loyalty. Traoré leaned back, whispering to the Burkinabe foreign minister beside him, "He's not speaking for Ghana, he's speaking for Paris." At that moment, a delegate from Mali slammed his fist onto the desk. His voice thundered across the chamber. "Enough. We know the truth. There are traitors among us, agents of the very powers that enslave our people. They wear our colors, but their hearts beat to foreign drums." Gasps filled the hall. Cameras turned, capturing the tension. The Ghanaian delegate flushed with anger. "Are you accusing me? How dare you insult a sovereign nation?" The Malian did not flinch. "I accuse no nation. I accuse the puppets of empire who sit among us and poison our unity." The chamber descended into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some defending, some condemning, others calling for order. And there, in the uproar, Traoré stood once more. His voice did not rise in anger, but it carried like thunder. Let Africa decide today who we serve. Do we serve the memory of colonizers or the destiny of our children? The chains on our currency, our passports, our economies must be broken. Not tomorrow. Not in theory. Now. The chamber froze. The betrayal had been exposed. The division laid bare. The choice could no longer be postponed. The uproar in that chamber mirrors a truth written into the very architecture of Africa's modern economies. For decades, our nations have waved flags of independence, while their treasuries, their banks, and even their currencies remain chained to Paris, London, and Washington. Consider the CFA franc, a currency still used by 14 African nations. On its face, it appears stable, a safeguard against inflation. But beneath the surface, it is a leash. Every CFA franc in circulation is guaranteed by the French Treasury. African nations must deposit half of their foreign reserves into France's central bank, granting Paris veto power over their economies. Even as Africa grows cotton, gold, uranium, and oil, its own wealth cycles back through Europe before returning home in trickles. The figures are staggering. Experts estimate that France has siphoned trillions of dollars in value from West and Central Africa through this system since the 1962. Trillions, while millions of Africans live without reliable electricity, clean water, or functioning hospitals. This is not mere history, it is present tense. When leaders in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea announced their intention to exit the CFA franc, they were met with diplomatic threats and financial blackmail. Western think tanks warned of instability, media outlets painted them as radicals, and investors pulled out in orchestrated waves to sow panic. But the CFA franc is only one chain. There are others. The IMF and World Bank, with their loans dressed as aid, attach conditions that force nations to privatize public services, sell land to foreign agribusiness, and cut subsidies for the poor. These policies enrich elites and foreign companies, but strip Africa of food security and industrial growth. Colonial trade routes, designed not to connect African nations to one another, but to funnel raw materials out to Europe. Even today, intra-African trade accounts for only 15% of the continent's commerce, compared to 70% within Europe. The roads, rails, and ports that should bind us together were instead built to extract. Resource contracts, signed in secrecy, grant foreign corporations decades-long rights to Africa's oil, minerals, and land, often for pennies on the dollar. In Niger, before its recent break with France, uranium sold cheaply to French companies powered Parisian homes while Niamey's streets lay in darkness. And then there was Muammar Gaddafi's plan. Love him or hate him, one cannot deny the scope of his vision. A gold-backed African dinar. He sought to create a currency independent of the dollar, the euro, and the CFA franc, anchored in Africa's immense gold reserves. Western intelligence reports, later revealed through leaked emails, confirmed that this project alarmed NATO powers. Months later, Libya was bombed, its leader toppled, its dream of monetary sovereignty buried beneath rubble. The lesson is stark. Any African leader who dares to break the chains of dependency is met not with applause, but with sanctions, coups, or drone strikes. And yet, the calls grow louder. Traoré, Goïta, and their allies are not merely resisting, they are proposing something new, a common African currency not tied to Paris or Washington, but to African resources backed by African institutions. A currency that circulates in Kinshasa as easily as in Nairobi, in Ouagadougou, as freely as in Johannesburg. The evidence is clear. The question is not whether Africa is chained, it is whether Africa has the courage to cut those chains. The vote was set for the next morning. Overnight, the city buzzed with rumors, whispers of bribes exchanged in hotel rooms, threats delivered in hushed tones, and foreign embassies working the phones deep into the night. Some leaders wavered, Could their fragile economies survive without Western aid? Could their militaries stand without Western weapons? The doubts were real, and the weight of history pressed heavily on their shoulders. But at dawn, as the delegates returned to the hall, the atmosphere had changed. Outside, thousands of citizens had gathered: students, farmers, market women, workers. They held banners in dozens of languages, but their message was one Africa, one currency, one future. And the people had spoken before the leaders could. Inside, the vote began. Name after name was called. Some hesitated, glancing nervously at their peers. Others raised their placards with fire in their eyes. The tally grew. The tension mounted. And then it happened. The deciding vote tipped the scale. By a narrow margin, the African Union declared Africa would begin the process of creating one passport and one currency. The hall erupted. Some cheered with tears streaming down their faces. Others walked out in protest, their ties to foreign patrons too strong to break. Traoré did not cheer. He did not gloat. He simply rose to his feet and spoke quietly, almost solemnly. This is not victory. This is responsibility. What we have done today is plant a seed. Whether it grows into freedom or is strangled by corruption and betrayal depends on us all. His words cut through the noise. The celebration softened into contemplation. The cameras captured his face, not of a conqueror, but of a guardian. That evening, across the continent, televisions flickered with breaking news. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Johannesburg to Dakar, families gathered around screens. Children pointed, asking their parents what it meant. Elders whispered that they had waited their whole lives to see this day. But in the capitals of Paris, London, and Washington, the mood was starkly different. Analysts warned of an African rupture. Military advisors drafted contingency plans. Banks calculated their potential losses. The seed of unity was seen not as hope, but as threat. And yet, the most important battlefield was not in boardrooms or war rooms. It was in the hearts of Africans themselves. Would they defend this fragile decision? Would they build institutions strong enough to resist sabotage? Would they stay united when the temptations of division returned? The future was unwritten, but for the first time in centuries, Africa had written the opening line with its own pen. The summit ended, but the echo of that decision spread far beyond the walls of the conference hall. Across the world, it was called many things: reckless, dangerous, historic. But for ordinary Africans, it was called something else: hope. In Ouagadougou, a farmer looked up at the sky and told his son, "Maybe one day, the grain we harvest will feed our people first, not another country." In Nairobi, a young woman studying economics whispered to her classmates, "We are finally writing our own chapter." And in Cape Town, an elder who had lived through apartheid smiled through his wrinkles and said, "Africa is rising. I have lived to see it." But hope is fragile. The empires that once carved Africa into pieces will not watch silently as those pieces come together. Pressure will increase. Sanctions will be threatened. Propaganda will intensify. Some leaders will fall to temptation. And that is why the burden no longer rests only on Traoré or the presidents who cast their votes. It rests on the shoulders of the people, because nations are not defended in palaces, they are defended in the streets, in the fields, in the classrooms, in the choices of ordinary men and women who refuse to bow. If Africa truly wants one passport, one currency, one future, then the question is not, will the West allow it? The real question is, will Africans fight for it? And to you watching, perhaps thousands of miles away, do not underestimate the power of this moment. What happens in Africa will shape the future of the world. If Africa rises, the world changes. So I ask you, do you believe this fragile seed of unity will grow into freedom, or will it be crushed before it can take root? The story is not finished. The pen is in Africa's hand. The next chapter is about to be written.